This is Republican Convoy DX-307. We are under attack by unknown missiles. We have lost our escort and are unarmed. Please assist. Multiple missile attacks! We are carrying thousands of colonists. Someone help us! Please help us!
Homeworld Cataclysm is a standalone expansion for Homeworld, published by Sierra Entertainment. Considering how well the original game has performed critically and financially, the idea of an expansion is logical. Homeworld raked in an incredible number of awards and sold 500,000 units in its first 6 months, just in the US. It became a rich baby, not to mention the parents. Not only was it an extremely polished, beautiful looking and sounding experience, but it also offered a captivating story that was able to grip even me, someone who knows nothing about strategy games and used to care even less about them. With its ending being quite open for potential sequels, the only question that remains is, how will Relic top their first masterpiece? Well, they won't attempt anything like that for the next few years, since Homeworld 2 isn't gonna be released until 2003, and we're only standing in the beginning of the 2000s. You see, Relic was not in charge of Cataclysm's development. The project was actually developed by Barking Dog Studios, a Canadian studio who not only had a hand in developing the original Counter-Strike, but also Bully, Scholarship Edition, after Rockstar acquired the studio and rebranded them as Rockstar Vancouver, but that's a whole other story. If you're a newcomer to Homeworld who entered with the remastered versions or Deserts of Karak, you might be wondering about this one since it's not in the collection. It's not for sale on Steam either, also there's a game on GOG called Homeworld Emergence, what about that one? Cataclysm is Emergence, but Blizzard basically holds a monopoly over the word Cataclysm by the looks of it, so it had to be renamed. That's only one of Cataclysm's problems though. Let's talk about the fact that the source code is lost, meaning that if Gearbox were to remaster the game, they would have to remake it from scratch. The possibility of which is unsure, since in an interview with Gearbox chief creative director Brian Martell, he talks about how the game's storyline isn't totally in line with everything that happens between 1 and 2, and it kind of takes a little bit away from that massive story. I never disagreed harder about a video game opinion before. Like, Homeworld 1 and 2 has a 100-year gap in between, and Cataclysm takes up an incredibly small portion of it, which can be described as a neat little detour, but again, I digress. However, he also talks about wanting to make it available for people craving some Homeworld, so really, only time will tell whether we receive Cataclysm Remastered or not. The picture I painted here is probably rather mixed. I mean, the source code is lost, the game was released without fanfare on GOG, renamed into something else. Put those notions away. Right now, don't you hold on to negative feelings like that, because Homeworld Cataclysm is an incredible adventure through space that oozes Homeworld atmosphere, like a freshly popped pimple seeps pus. It also has some spooky business up its sleeve that makes it a great game to play this month. It's actually a really great game for Halloween if you're a sci-fi guy. A sci-fi! I merged Fi and Guy, but it changed nothing and I feel like a dumbass. Story spoilers for the original Homeworld and its ending are to be expected, but I'm trying my best to limit them. If this is the first Homeworld related thing you've ever seen, stop watching now and play the original. Please. Or watch my video of it. Oh wait, Cataclysm paints a violent picture of what is to come after the exiles return to their home planet. 15 years after the Battle of Higara, the Titan Empire has collapsed and fractured into different factions, with a republic growing out of the ashes alongside the remnants of the Imperialists. While the former established an alliance with the Higaran Kits, the clans, the latter is trying to violently avenge what has happened to their intergalactic empire. Even though the Imperialists are weakened, they still maintain a strong presence in certain sectors of their old territory. Diplomacy isn't the only problem in the life of a Higaran though. With the re-establishment of the clans that were united before the mothership's departure, came hierarchical struggles. Some kifs became prominent in Higaran politics, while others had to resort to second-hand technology bought from the Bentusi, as a means to keep up with the other clans. You are one of such minor kifs, the Santa, controlling the mining vessel Kunlan on what starts out as a typical mining expedition close to Higara. That's when you pick up on a distress signal by a Kif Nabal fleet, asking for reinforcements in order to fend off an imperialist attack on the homeworld. Cataclysm's narrative deviates a bit from the Homeworld formula, while maintaining the gist of what made the original story great. The setup here is strikingly similar, with us playing not only as a minor Kith, but also miners of said clan. As the player, you're basically placed on the very bottom of the food chain, and others will remind you of that constantly. The first mission showcases this rather well, since you're basically playing a pivotal role in defending the homeworld from Imperial forces. You not only ensure the safety of a sensor grid that picks up on approaching enemy units, but you also eliminate a big chunk of their resource operation, forcing them to retreat. Not to mention the fact that you make sure they won't come back. Yet, your actions will not even be mentioned at the end of the battle. At this point, your standing among the clans is clear, and the necessity to change that some way is going to linger around in the air. Or space where you don't have any of it, but I digress. That's why finding some sort of alien beacon floating in deep space almost comes as a saving grace after some dirty work you did for the Nabal who leave you to fend off some space pirates for yourself. The beacon itself, serving as a beacon of hope, has to remain a secret. Samta needs this advantage over the other kith. Therefore, you're instructed to meet up with research personnel who might be able to tell if it's of any use. The previously mentioned pirates, the Tyrannic Raiders, however, captured the Claysan, the research ship that was supposed to decode your space birthday present. After a swift escape plan, you save the Claysan and start research on the pod. Instead of a birthday present, however, it turns into Pandora's box real quick, kickstarting Homeworld Cataclysm's main conflict.
Research module, this is the bridge. We've got power fluctuations in your area and the hangar bay. Are you running any tests?
Not that I know of, Bridge. Let me check.
What was that? What's going on down there? Fluctuation spreading to lower engine module.
Don't know. Give me a second. We were examining surface material from the
What is going
probe
on?
and,
Now we've got biohazard warnings going off across the lower decks. What have you done?
Something is loose. It's killing us. You've got to save the rest of the ship. Jettison the lower deck.
The lower deck of the Kunlan succumbs into total chaos, with screams pouring out of your radio and alarms blaring throughout the ship. The only way to save the ship is to jettison the lower deck, casting it deeper into the system while listening to the screaming personnel become ever so quiet. Upon further investigating the hangar module, all hell breaks loose as an energy beam infects the ships that happen to get close to its perimeter, turning them into coffins of flesh and steel flying through space. The beacon contained a virus, a beast that is able to rapidly reproduce and spread through the infection of ships, and you just let it loose on the galaxy.
Good job, kiddo.
Now try and live with that guilt, bucko. Cataclysm needs a few missions to kick into gears, with the first few of them serving as a means to get used to the mechanics and get a hold of your ships. Therefore, the story starts out relatively slow, and the notion that something bad is going to happen due to that distress beacon is really clear. I still didn't expect an all-devouring biomechanical thing spreading with a necromorph laser beam to rear its disgusting head out of it though. There is also the question of how do you establish a villain like this. It's a virus with an ambition to spread, to feed. Not exactly a villain that you might be able to relate to. But on the other hand, Homeworld was never really about that. Main antagonists in Homeworld games usually play the role of the embodiment of the worst qualities of their own factions, as the Emperor did in the previous game. The Beast works similarly, but has more time to shine in the spotlight. Its simple nature is what makes it an interesting adversary. It feels primal, but has the ability to make tactical decisions on the fly, and it becomes hard to pinpoint how it operates exactly. It also speaks to you occasionally in a distorted voice that is probably made up of all the life he devoured and merged into a whole. Ugh. It's going to make you experience some messed up shit on your journey. The way it's built up and fleshed out is detailed. You will get to know a lot about it, its origins, even its weakness after a while. But early on, it's actually straight up unpredictable. The way it's written is fitting, and while over the top, it doesn't feel too cheesy for a 20-year-old game. I would actually say that it is able to instill a sense of tension throughout the story quite effectively because it is a nut job. Of the medication, hell-bent on devouring you. Even the strongest beings in the galaxy are afraid of this thing, as the Bentusi would rather self-destruct than get captured by it. Your characters also react to all the atrocities happening around you. I was somewhat critical of Karan Sajet and the fleet intelligence in the original game because their deliveries sometimes felt so emotionless that it was perplexing. In this case, Cataclysm ups the ante with the voice acting, which, while suffering from a bit of over-the-top cheesiness that is the staple of 90s and early 2000s voice work, still manages to capture what I feel exactly.
These entities make contact with a compatible surface. They begin to absorb material and infiltrate the target structure. When they make contact with organic matter, they use the mass to form a neural control network that then takes control of the ship.
Whenever Fleet Command was surprised and tensed up over something unexpected happening, I felt the same way. He and the tactical officer conveyed emotions and dialogue that was not only fitting but also facilitated my investment in the story, since what I felt seemed real and valid in the context of this video game. I feel like my fleet is made up of actual human beings even though they are basically nameless and don't have any clear traits to speak of. They just feel believable. Again, Homeworld's focus is on your people, the little micronation you have on your command ship, instead of the components that make up said micronation. The scale of the original was one of its most important features, since it established the stakes. When it comes to the survival of the remnants of a civilization, there is a sense of monumentalism. You feel like you are the embodiment of something grand. That is juxtaposed with the role of the underdog, however, and it creates this really interesting set of circumstances, resulting in a power fantasy where said underdogs become stronger than their enemies and successfully whoop intergalactic ass. In Cataclysm, the scale is a lot smaller, as your fleet is only comprised of a fraction of one Higaran clan. That adds a lot to the feeling of being an underdog in many ways. First and foremost, your combat efficiency is low for almost half of the game. Your units are utilitarian and are recalibrated for combat purposes. Not to mention that you can't sustain many of them due to a lack of personnel, I guess? I always feel weak or insignificant when playing Cataclysm, and this is also what the story wants you to believe, as you are just trying to become accepted and more appreciated in a system that you've been serving relentlessly but still haven't gotten anything out of. When it comes to the pacing of Cataclysm's story, I don't think I have many negatives to bring up. Aside from one cheeky little bugger, there aren't any missions I could wholeheartedly call filler, because everything you do is in some way done against the beast. The story has an incredible sense of urgency to it that's facilitated by the hella hideous hive mind thingy and the fact that it spreads as rapidly as the news of someone having extra food in your average dorm fridge do. The urgency of the plot is further reinforced by the way missions are structured, with many of them offering a chance to perform an emergency hyperspace jump, leaving some units behind. Missions aren't gonna end with you destroying every enemy unit on the map. Oftentimes you'll have to escape from overwhelming odds, and it just ups the ante in terms of tension. This is actually one of the improvements to the Homeworld formula that I'm absolutely happy with. So yeah, you guys will have a tough job delivering a lethal injection into the bloodstream of this thing. How are you gonna do that? I'll tell you, after we hyperspace jumped into the spoiler reaches. Skip here if you would like to miss out on how the game will continue and end. I'm pretty sure you already know, but I won't ruin the fun of playing Cataclysm for yourself, okay? We're heading out. Damn, these hyperspace jumps are taxing on my system, holy shit. I wouldn't do this, but people scare me, like I can see someone slitting my throat at night for spoiling a 20-year-old game. So, Cataclysm's story already set its foot down on what type of story it wants to tell. Sci-fi horror. When I first realized what it's going for, I absolutely adored it. Simply because of how well it tells a somewhat spoopy story in an RTS game. Upon discovering the beast, it's not gonna stop showing up. It will even attempt an attack on the Bentusi, as I mentioned previously. It's just pounding away relentlessly on him, on you, and also your allies. You're gonna experience a lot of extreme measures utilized by the beast. The damn thing infects colony ships and uses the biomatter and steel to produce infectious missiles. That's absolutely fucked, but also great at the same time. You can probably already see that the beast is basically the focus of the story. No shit. This is true in many ways, since an unpredictable, all-consuming virus that cannot be controlled would probably make a great super weapon, right? Of course it would!
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! What?
All the aforementioned qualities can ensure us in such matters, according to the imperialists, who are staying true to their name, in the sense that their perception of this thing's deception is akin to a stormtrooper's perception. After saving a colony's worth of people and seeing the Bentusi blow themselves up instead of getting captured by this thing, the Kunlan will have to take matters into their own hands. You will not only sabotage a secret Imperial research base and defend your own people from the beast, you actually end up building a big-ass siege cannon on your command ship to eviscerate every particle of it. This unfortunately doesn't work out, simply due to how much the beast has evolved through feeding. There is one way that it could be burnt up though, but that will require a sample from the original beast, and also for us to fire the siege cannon multiple times because we are unable to do so. I mean, that pod had to come from somewhere, right? Oh boy, it did. Research conducted on the pod provided the Kunlan with navigational data on an ancient spaceship called the Nagarok, which through the use of experimental hyperdrive technology was able to traverse through galaxies, jumping from their own into ours. But while doing so, they contracted an entity mid-jump. After realizing what kind of space vermin they're dealing with, the travelers sabotaged their own engines to trap the beast and themselves on board the Nagarok, as a means to stop it from infecting this new and unknown galaxy. They were really great at shipbuilding though, and their emergency protocol sent a distress pod out with a small bit of space mold in it. Yes, that's the one. It's a great setup and not only deepens the mystique of space, where all sorts of dangers lurk about in the darkness, jumping on top of spacecraft and all that, but also establishes how much of a problem the beast can be if that ship becomes functional. So we'll have to get there first before the pesky Imperials do. To pinpoint the Nagarok, we'll have to get a hold of some Tyrannic Raider star charts, which is done by playing the only filler mission in the game that is actually downright idiotic. After ambushing a raider outpost, since they didn't want to cooperate, you not only take their maps, you bring them on board your ship, and not as prisoners. Who the fuck would do something like this, especially if you are aware that they are Taiidan lapdogs whose only current goal is to enslave an entity from another galaxy that cannot be enslaved. Needless to say, they place explosives on the command ship to cripple and drag it out of hyperspace for an imperialist ambush that you'll just whoop. Even if you do it with a small bit of health, you just whoop it. Course set for the Nagarok, the engines of which are already being repaired by Imperial forces. The beast is aware of your plan, but a deal has already been struck between it and the Imperials, as they have already divided the galaxy 50-50. Your only chance is to land a mimic inside the Nagarok to get some tissue for the cannon to be recalibrated. But for the siege cannon to function properly, you'll have to ask the Bentusi, as they are the hacker man of the universe. But after witnessing the capabilities of the beast, they just want to leave the galaxy behind, to run away from it basically. The Kunlan at this point has no other chance but to confront the strongest race in the entire galaxy to make them listen. This is in my opinion one of the best moments in the story, as the commanding officer basically yells at the Bentusi out of sheer frustration and hopelessness, and actually manages to get through to them.
The mighty Bentusi, slaughtering the people who asked for your help. You're worse than the beast. At least the beast doesn't pretend to be righteous.
We fear. For the first time in countless orbits, we fear.
Join the kith. We're not blind, just scared. As scared as you. Now, are you gonna help us, or are we gonna have to ram this mining ship down the throat of the first station that approaches?
In turn, the Bentusi provides you with heat sinks that can keep the siege cannon shooting multiple times. After blowing apart the beast mothership that formed out of the research module, the crew is ready to destroy the Nagarok and the beast once and for all. Looking back at their struggles and accomplishments, the Kunlan responds to a Republican distress call, according to which the beast was able to take control of a secret weapon they've been sneakily building, called the Nomad Moon, capable of emitting a strong repulsion field, pushing away and destroying ships in the process. The Kunlan, now a warship, enters the system and destroys the Nomad Moon, forcing the beast to show its real intentions and making the Imperials realize how much of a fraud the damn thing is, as they zero in on the Nagarok themselves. With new tech from the Bentusi, the miners destroy the Nagarok and the beast hive mind. After their arduous journey, the Kunlan and Kif Samta finally receive the recognition they deserve from other Kifs, as sons and daughters of Samta have become beast slayers, saviors of the galaxy. The ending also hints at how the beast will occasionally pop up here and there, but the Kunlan's technological advancements in terms of weaponry and defense basically prove to be enough to exterminate it whenever it does so. While I really like the story's pacing and progression, the whole conflict gets resolved in one mission quite suddenly, which wouldn't be a problem if the final boss fight of the game could be done without the Bentusi super ships that they just threw at you out of the blue. I fought the beast by myself up until this point, but now you throw something at me that could have murdered this thing from the get-go? Give me a break. One thing I loved about Homeworld's final battle is the fact that you also have to rely on what you've learned throughout the game. You got outside help, sure, but it wasn't some sort of overpowered unit that you could use to blaze through the entire enemy fleet. You had to provide your own ships with reinforcements if you were overwhelmed, and it further established how much you were on your own. I feel like Cataclysm, in this case, sort of went against its own narrative and somewhat broke its own well-done power fantasy. The game even gives you hints as how you should destroy the Nagarok, but these didn't work for me. I set my super acolytes on it though, and I won the game. This is basically my only complaint against Cataclysm's story. The build up to the ending is great, but it comes and ends really abruptly. I feel like instead of that Titan ambush mission, you could have given us a mission from a few years later as an extra, where you still sort of keep kicking against it, sort of wiping it out. It would have provided the necessary landing for the ending. I mean, as soon as you destroy the Nagorok, the game ends, even if the entirety of your screen is peppered with beast ships, and that's just off. Again, I feel like the ending jumped really far, but failed the landing, if you know what I mean. Hey, you're back! The spoiler gang missed out on a really well-paced story that has less filler than the original Homeworld, but also an ending that's cut a bit short, though I still feel like the smaller scale helped the narrative a lot, simply because of how desperate your quest ends up feeling. I absolutely loved the darker take on Homeworld, with more filth going on, and would really appreciate more spin-offs like Cataclysm. The narrative has flaws, but the immersion is great. Not to mention the fact that the gameplay portion is subconsciously trying to facilitate this as well, even if it tends to stretch it a bit far for its own good. As I mentioned before, the story and gameplay of Homeworld games are intertwined in quite a beautiful way. You control a ship full of your own people who you're going to sacrifice by sending them into battle or assigning dangerous work for them to do. This is basically a Homeworld staple at this point, that's further reinforced by the limited resource pool of the game. Units are valuable in a story sense because they are your people, but also in a gameplay sense because without them you can't make any progress. You got them ships to fly. This worked really well in the original because resources were scarce, and you had to be careful with units early on. Risk-reward moves like salvaging were really worth it because of how much you won with a captured unit that didn't count to your unit cap. While in the case of Cataclysm, there is an extreme overabundance of resources in normal difficulty. Yes, there are 5 difficulty settings now instead of an adaptive difficulty system. I set it to normal to get the optimal experience because I just suck at strategy games. I'm a dummy. I'm no Space Napoleon or Space Alexander the Great or whatever. If you are a strategy game wet, crank that difficulty up and strap yourself in. The reason I brought up the fuckton of collectible resources is the fact that it basically sabotages the narrative and the sense of insignificance they want to establish. You can constantly keep rebuilding ships and throw them at whatever is coming towards you. This only becomes a problem because for a long time you'll have to resort to using cheap fighters and corvettes, the construction of which is not putting any sort of strain on your resource pool at all. It's really weird to see a mining ship that can just spew combat fighters almost infinitely. You see where I'm getting with this, don't you? Early fights could be somewhat trivial because of this, but in my opinion that isn't necessarily a problem since the game introduces most of its mechanics through the first few missions, being forgiving in the process. You just gotta build them craft and go pew pew! If you can get through that narrative dissonance I brought up, then congrats, because Homeworld Cataclysm is actually a really fun game to play. That's mostly due to the improved unit functionality they brought in. Units can be upgraded and even linked together in some cases to provide you with a bigger and more effective version of said units. Acolytes are Cataclysm's interceptors, fighter ships that can be turned into an ACV, if you link a pair of them. Now it's a corvette that is a lot more versatile and durable. You can do the same with a pair of mimics, which turn into an MCV, a big mimic. It can disguise itself as an enemy unit. Yes, you basically have a recon ship that is actually useful as long as there aren't any proximity sensors around you. As you probably already noticed while I was hooking them ships up with each other, ships have special skills now. Acolytes can torpedo enemies and these are really useful. ACVs can cause an EMP discharge that immobilizes enemies for a short period of time, the list goes on. You also have frigates with varying degrees of usefulness. Ramming frigates can push enemy units away if you are overwhelmed or just waiting for reinforcements. They are extremely situational, but it's well worth keeping a few at hand. Multi-beam frigates are good against capital ships and frigates, even fighters, holy shit. Hive frigs are basically anti-fighter ships with small turrets that work as a swarm. Capital ships, of course, are the big boys with the most devastating weapons like ion cannons and big missiles. They are late game units and probably the most reliable ones. I almost forgot about the Leech, which is a microship that is able to leech onto enemy units and sabotage or even destroy them. It's extremely useful and cheap to mass produce, though I didn't rely on them that much because actual fights are more fun to go through. Though there seems to be quite the variety, your fighters and corvettes are extremely limited. You also don't have many ships that are specifically aimed at a ship type, meaning that the game won't turn into rock, paper, scissors where you'll have the perfect solution based on what type of enemies are coming your way. I like that. I don't have specific dishes to serve, baby. I'm making a fucking spaceship ragu. I will probably burn it because I'm not very good at cooking though. Salvaging also went through quite the change. You see, the lovely and huggable salvage corvettes are not here anymore, and workers took their place. These are universal units that perform resource harvesting, salvaging, and also repair tasks. Just like in the original, you might need multiple ships to catch a bigger one, but in Cataclysm you'll also have to deal some damage before attempting a salvaging maneuver. While I understand that they went with this change to increase the difficulty of salvaging, it just becomes tedious after a while that I have to keep attacking enemy units without accidentally blowing them up. Also, instead of bringing them on board, the command ship repaints and captures the stolen ships with... I need an acceptable sci-fi explanation for this one. Enemies are really easy to catch though, aside from the annoyance of having to shoot them first, because your workers are durable and tough little beans. They are easier to catch, but they also add to your max unit count, which was probably added to stop salvage scamming, due to how easy it actually is now to catch them because of the workers' durability and the fact that your enemies don't care for being salvaged. Yeah. Again, this wouldn't bother me if the game didn't have objectives specifically about catching enemy ships, so whenever I have to capture an enemy ship with a full unit cap, I have to scrap parts of my fleet, which is rather tedious. I felt like salvaging worked really well the way it was implemented in the first game, and changing it was probably necessary so you can't break the game while having too many OP units. Homeworld has an adaptive difficulty system, so there it wasn't really a problem, but here, where there are fixed settings, more balancing was needed. It's still fun to salvage, but I would rather do it the original way. As I said, workers also collect resources from asteroids, gases, and even crystals, but the latter required to be brought close to the processor or the command ship for processing. Did I write this? They are really useful. There are also other changes made to Homeworld's gameplay, like the command ship itself. Compared to the mothership from the previous game, it's a unit that you upgrade visually and in terms of functionality too. You can increase your incredibly small unit cap through building support modules on your command ship and carriers. You can also build different specialization modules like engineering or weapons. These will provide you with different research topics which upon being researched can result in upgrades or new units entirely. Every module researches its own topics. If you have 2 topics in engineering, you have to do them one after the other, but a weapon and an armor research can go simultaneously. Unlike building, research won't cost you anything, and upgrading only requires a temporary shutdown for bigger ships. Fighter and corvette class ships have to dock in for upgrades. The gameplay loop is still the same, however, as you'll have to venture through 3D environments, gathering resources and fighting off enemies, while also completing objectives. They made navigation a bit easier with a waypoint functionality that lets you give multiple continuous move orders instead of just one. Aside from this, movement and the sensors manager behave the same way as in Homeworld 1. In space, you have 360 degrees of freedom, and that's something you'll have to get used to since different enemies and objectives are going to be in different altitudes. The sensors manager makes navigation a lot easier simply because you can see the whole playground in front of you. They added a 3D grid for some reason, but if I'm being honest, I can't really see how it helps me get around the map. When it comes to visibility, you can zoom in on your units, but unidentified enemy units are covered by the fog of war. The nebula of war, because we're in space, bucko. Looking around, therefore, is again restricted to your units and enemies that are close to you. Also, you can't pan the camera, only rotate it, but this doesn't feel restrictive at all. Swapping between units is intuitive, especially if you have set up different groups of them, bound to one of the number keys. Controlling these units is the main focus of the gameplay. There are different formations for you to set up, combined with different tactics that define how your units will behave in combat situations. Mixing and matching these is important simply because certain formations behave differently based on the tactics you utilize. This is basically all you need to know before jumping headfirst into dogfights and big boy cruiser battles, which look great, but I feel like they can feel a bit trivial sometimes for a simple reason. As you could see from my footage, most of it is sped up. Well, Cataclysm introduced a mechanic that Homeworld 1 needed desperately. It's called time compression, and it basically enables you to slow down or speed up the game literally. It's a useful mechanic when I'm at the end of a mission and have to collect all the remaining resources in my vicinity, but when it comes to fights, I feel like it takes away some of the attention you would normally pay to them. There are instances where I feel like the game is just wasting my time with distances I have to travel, and I just turn the speed up and sort of zone out while throwing units against my enemies. It wants you to traverse through space, and we're talking long distances in certain missions. I'm pretty sure the mechanic was implemented with that and harvesting in mind, but as a small nitpick, I feel like some battles are less interesting because you can just speed through them. I said some, because there are a lot of great and enjoyable ones. Among other changes, I especially love the ones they made to the HUD, which looks a lot busier by default. It showcases ongoing research procedures and building projects, so I don't have to manually check the appropriate tabs, and that is a necessary quality of life improvement in my opinion. Same with the Objectives tab that also provides you with hints as to how you should accomplish said objectives. These are useful 99% of the time, the other 1% is the final mission. Though I feel like they can be a bit too patronizing. I'm really torn on the gameplay side of things. I feel like fights are more interesting with the newly implemented unit abilities, but the unit cap sort of breaks the usefulness of salvaging because I just can't do it sometimes, even though I was taught to do it. I grew up salvaging these fucks! I still had fun, and the improvements made to the HUD and the movement mechanics are welcome additions, especially the latter. I just feel like the game trying to make me feel more insignificant was too much in certain cases. Maybe I appreciate the adaptive difficulty system a bit more now. Most of the experience I thoroughly enjoyed, despite some unwanted changes. Another department where changes worked out a lot better though is the presentation. Homeworld Cataclysm was a pretty game upon release, just like the original. Even though it's not a technical marvel anymore, it had a lot of neat little improvements to the original game that facilitated immersion in its world. For starters, a lot of extra effects have been added, such as more intricate lighting and moving parts to the still background images of levels that make space feel a lot more believable. I don't know what kind of space storm is going on there, but I'm staying here. I'm not going there. You can even see repair bots on capital ships working away to fix their mama up, not to mention the salvaging animation that is just really damn sci-fi. I just love the lighting of the time, the small flashing lights and other intricate details that grant a sophisticated but also special quality to the game. It is dated by today's standards, but it's a joy to look at, and I'm not even nostalgic for this game. Bringing in absolutely new ships in terms of their looks and functionality was a great way of spicing up the visual department. Some TOS ships are utilitarian, bulky and simple. There isn't a sense of elegance to them, and it makes sense in the context of the story. There are some really inventive designs, especially the command ship that looks absolutely weird without upgrades. It's like a thin little worm with a big head and a big ass. When it comes to the beast designs, I love the fleshy growths on infected units and the beast mothership's oddly shaped exterior. I really fucks with the idea of biomechanical designs akin to the works of Giger, and just the whole notion of these worlds colliding is really interesting to me. Where is Scorn? Where is it? Also, I gotta mention the story cutscenes in between missions that are not only detailed and stylish, but also have great compositions. When it comes to camera angles though, the game itself utilizes them quite effectively in in-game cutscenes as well, so my compliments in this case are not restricted to the black and white beauties. The game has quite the cinematic feel, though I don't like it when it takes control away for a few seconds mid-action. These bits are a bit overused in this game compared to Homeworld 1, but not that big of a problem, absolutely just a nitpick. Sound design has all the great qualities of Homeworld, with every unit and faction having a really specific sound to them. You can basically recognize ship types, sometimes even individual ships, based on their humming sounds. Not to mention that every unit has its own voice actor in this game, which, while kind of being a staple of strategy games, feels weird in this really dark rendition of Homeworld. But I hear a voice line and I know which unit it is.
Roger, holographic projectors on. Roger, Commander.
Escorts
Can you
assigned.
speak up?
They are a bit cheesy and somewhat try-hard, but they are dripping with charm. I just wish the audio wasn't compressed to fit on a CD. The music has a more electronic edge to it instead of classical elements. This change in style improves the darker atmosphere Barking Dog tries to establish though, with the electronic tracks sounding somewhat barebones and spooky. When it comes to the ambient soundscapes that provided most of the original's material, here they are sort of corrupted by the electronic influences. Some cuts sound mutated and filthy, complementing this game about a mutant virus really well. The ambience reeks mystery and uncertainty, and I absolutely adore it. Even the combat music sounds darker and harder to pinpoint. The tie-down battle theme actually goes against this, as it sort of embodies this violent and tribal sound that was a defining factor in the original, but here it's maybe a bit more unhinged. Again, I wish I could hear this in full fidelity. When it comes to the Cataclysm soundtrack though, we have to talk about a certain cut. This track is a lie simply because it makes you feel like the soundtrack is gonna be some cheap, stock music ridden mess. No, it's not. You probably heard the same thing in Empire Earth. I'm just confused about this one. Homeworld Cataclysm is an interesting addition to the Homeworld canon that offers changes in narrative, gameplay, and presentation too, while executing most of them effectively. The story is darker and similarly urgent, while providing less filler on the long run. The gameplay is tight and fun. Though I feel like some changes were unnecessary, it still introduced a lot of interesting mechanics and quirks that ventured into Homeworld too, and I think that says a lot. It is also a great looking and sounding game for its time, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it to every sci-fi fan or RTS fan in general. It's a shame it's the most underappreciated entry in the series simply because it wasn't made by Relic. Also, by the looks of it, even Relic didn't like that their IP was handed over to another studio, which is definitely understandable, but I feel like it deserves a lot more attention. Barking Dog did a really great job and made a game I come back to a lot. Play Homeworld, play the whole series, it's fucking great. I think that's what I wanted to say. I think I'm all out of words now. The Homeworld 2 review is gotta wait though, because I suck at that game. I suck at most games, but that's besides the point. I would like to do a few shorter projects now because school is becoming a bit too much for my baby brain. Thank you for sticking with me, and if you liked what you saw, consider liking and or subbing and hitting that bell, bucko. If you didn't like the video, give me a dislike and tell me what needs to be improved. I want this thing to be fleshed out into the best possible version of itself. But for that, I need you. Thank you again for watching and take care. Also, happy Halloween!